I sat near the back of the pews in the church, my hands gripping the wooden armrests so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart raced and cold sweat began to form on my palms, though I knew I couldn't show any weakness. I hadn't even finished the first hymn when unexpectedly, a sharp voice cut through the air from behind me. "She shouldn't be here." I turned slightly to see Marcus, Elias's brother, standing up, his face tight with tension, his voice loud enough for everyone in the church to hear. "She's the one who ruined Elias. Everyone knows it." His words hit me like a stone thrown straight to my face. I felt my stomach tighten, but I couldn't react. Then another voice, familiar but cold, chimed in. "She's not family." It was Tessa, Elias's wife. I hadn't seen her enter, but her voice was unmistakable. She pointed at me, her face as taut as a bowstring, and continued, "She has no right to be here. We should throw her out." I didn't move. I couldn't. My throat tightened and my body felt frozen, even though my heart was burning with a heat that seemed to spread through my chest. I didn't know how to feel. Was it guilt, anger, or something worse? But in that moment I knew one thing. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Had I ever been criticized like this before as part of this family? Had I ever been faced with such hatred, with no one willing to speak up in my defense? The answer was no. And that's why I felt like I was being torn apart right in front of the people I once called family. Then I heard another voice, gentle but commanding. Denise, Elias's mother, stood up from the front row. She wore a thin black veil, her hands hanging at her sides, but her eyes were anything but soft. "She's the reason my son is dead," she said, her voice quiet but sharp, like a knife cutting through the silence. Never before had I been accused so directly. Never had I been forced to face such brutal condemnation. No one spoke after that. The church was silent except for the faint sound of someone sobbing, though I couldn't tell who. But in that moment I knew it was over. The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating me. I was caught in this whirlwind of blame and anger. A storm I never imagined would hit me like this. I had been part of this family once. Now I was nothing more than a target, an outsider. I turned my gaze down to the pew in front of me, trying to steady my breathing. It didn't help. Nothing helped. The walls of the church seemed to close in on me, the stained glass windows casting shadows that danced ominously across the floor. This place, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but no words came. What could I say? How could I explain myself when everything was so twisted? When I was being blamed for something that wasn't entirely my fault? Elias's death. It was tragic, and it had shattered so many lives, including mine. But it wasn't my fault, was it? A cold shiver ran down my spine as I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see an older woman, a stranger, standing quietly. She wasn't part of the family, but her eyes, soft yet knowing, met mine with a compassion I wasn't sure I deserved. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder, offering a quiet comfort that felt more like a lifeline than an empty gesture. In that moment I realized that no matter how much I tried to explain, no one would listen. The accusations, the harsh words would drown out anything I had to say. The only thing I could do was leave. Leave the church, leave this family, leave everything behind. I stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay another second. With one last glance at the people who had once been my family, I turned and walked toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I kept moving. The door creaked as I opened it, and as the cold air hit me, I stepped outside into the gray world waiting beyond. The church doors slammed shut behind me, but the weight of the accusations still lingered. And with it, the realization that I had lost everything I once held dear. I stood there on the church steps, the wind biting at my face, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the building I had just walked out of. The sky was overcast, a dull gray that seemed to mirror the emptiness that had settled in my chest. My heart still thudded in my ears, a reminder of the storm that had just broken inside that cold, judgmental church. The world outside felt so foreign, so distant. I hadn't expected it to happen this way. Not in front of everyone, not in the church, not when I had just come to pay my respects. I thought I could make peace with the past. But how could I, when it was this cruel, this suffocating? My legs felt heavy, like I was trudging through quicksand, but I forced myself to take one step after another. I didn't know where I was going, and frankly, I didn't care. The thought of going back to that suffocating house, to face the family who had once been my sanctuary but were now my accusers, seemed impossible. So I kept walking. I found myself on a quiet street lined with trees, their branches bare and skeletal against the gray sky. It was eerily silent. The world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. For some revelation or epiphany that would make sense of the chaos that had just erupted in my life. But there was nothing. Just the wind, the empty street, and my own footsteps. I didn't know how long I walked. The streets blurred into one another, and the sounds of the city faded into nothing. I kept my head down, eyes focused on the ground, trying not to think. I couldn't afford to think. If I did, I knew I would break down. I had to keep moving, keep walking, even if I had nowhere to go. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of a small cafe. The warm light spilling out from the windows felt like a stark contrast to the coldness I felt inside. Without thinking, I walked in, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. It was quiet, almost empty, except for a couple sitting by the window, talking softly over their coffee. The barista behind the counter looked up as I entered, her smile fading when she saw my face. I must have looked like I had been through a storm. I barely acknowledged her as I approached the counter, my voice low when I ordered a coffee. It was all I could think to do, something familiar, something comforting, even if I didn't feel comforted at all. She nodded, probably sensing that I wasn't in the mood for small talk, and moved quickly to prepare my order. I took a seat at a table by the window, looking out at the street as the world continued on, oblivious to the devastation that had just shattered my life. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. I stared at the swirling patterns in the dark coffee, my thoughts a tangled mess. What was I supposed to do now? Where was I supposed to go? Elias. I couldn't escape his memory. He had been so much to me, my best friend, my lover, my anchor in the chaos of life. But now he was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had once seemed so solid, so sure. The whispers of guilt began to creep in again, uninvited. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I had ruined him. I had been there at the wrong time in the wrong place. We had made mistakes, things we couldn't take back. But did that mean I deserved to be blamed for his death? Did that mean I deserved to be cast aside, vilified by the very people who had once called me family? I took a deep breath, trying to steady the flood of thoughts rushing through my mind. But nothing made sense. Not the past, not the present, not the future. The emptiness inside me was all-encompassing, drowning out everything else. A soft voice broke through my thoughts. "Are you okay?" I looked up to see the barista standing in front of my table, her expression gentle, almost concerned. She must have sensed something was off, something more than just the exhaustion I was sure was written on my face. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know how to explain it. How could I, when I didn't even understand it myself? She stood there for a moment, then hesitantly pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. I was taken aback for a second, unsure of what to say or do, but I didn't ask her to leave. Maybe I just needed someone to talk to. Maybe she could be the stranger who would listen, who wouldn't judge me for the mess I had become. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said quietly, her eyes soft with understanding. "But sometimes it helps to not be alone in the silence." I looked at her, unsure of how to respond. My throat tightened, and I could feel the weight of the tears threatening to fall. I didn't know why, but something about her kindness made the walls I had built around myself start to crack. The emotional dam that had held back my grief for so long began to leak. I began, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I took a shaky breath and looked down at the coffee cup in front of me, my fingers tracing the rim. I don't know what to do anymore. She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she let on. Sometimes life doesn't give us clear answers. But you don't have to have it all figured out right now. I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I lost someone a long time ago, and I thought I could make things right. But now it's like I've lost everything all over again. The barista didn't respond immediately. She simply sat there, letting the silence stretch between us. And for the first time in hours, the quiet didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a kind of refuge, a space where I didn't have to explain, didn't have to justify myself. She didn't need to know the full story. She didn't need to judge me. Finally, she spoke. You can't undo the past. You can't change what's been done. But you can keep going, even if it's just one small step at a time. I looked up at her, her words sinking in. I wasn't sure I could move forward, but maybe, just maybe, I could try. The world outside was still cold and distant, but for the first time today, I felt a small flicker of warmth in my chest. Maybe the walk hadn't been for nothing. Maybe there was a way through this. As I sat there in the small cafe, the warmth of the coffee slowly spreading through me, I couldn't help but wonder how much of my life had been spent running from things. From the past. From the pain. From the people I had once loved and who had, in turn, loved me. But somehow, along the way, I had forgotten what it meant to truly live, to not just survive the days but to actually be present in them. I had been hiding, keeping my emotions locked behind the fortress of my own making. But now, with every passing moment, the walls were crumbling brick by brick, revealing the raw, vulnerable heart I had buried so deep inside me. The barista, who had become a quiet presence at my table, stood up after a while, giving me a gentle nod as if to say that her work here was done. She didn't push for more words, didn't demand anything from me. She simply offered what she could. A moment of respite. A silent understanding. Take care of yourself, she said, her voice soft but firm, as if she truly meant it. She smiled and moved back to the counter, leaving me with my thoughts, the remnants of my coffee, and the weight of the past that still clung to me like a shadow. I sat there for a while longer, lost in my own head. Time seemed to bend and stretch in the small cafe. Outside, the world continued its endless motion. Cars passed by, people hurried on with their busy lives, and the wind rattled the branches of the trees lining the streets. But inside, everything stood still. My heart still thudded with the echoes of that earlier confrontation at the church, the accusations, the cold looks, the memory of their faces, their disappointment and anger, stuck with me like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I hadn't even gotten a chance to say goodbye, to explain. They hadn't wanted to listen. They never wanted to hear the truth. Maybe they never would. The truth was too messy, too complicated for them to handle. They wanted black and white, but life, as I had learned the hard way, was an endless sea of grays. I didn't want to go back to the house. The thought of facing the silence there, knowing that no one would speak to me, knowing that no one would ever look at me the same way again, was unbearable. But I knew I had to. I couldn't run forever. The weight of the past, the weight of my mistakes, was something I couldn't escape, no matter how far I tried to go. I stood up, leaving a few bills on the table, and made my way toward the door. The bell above it jingled again, this time marking my departure from the warm cocoon of the cafe into the harsh world outside. The cold wind bit at my skin, but it felt grounding. I needed the sharpness of the air to clear my fogged thoughts, to remind me that I was still here, still alive, despite the wreckage of my heart. As I walked, the thoughts continued to swirl in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about Elias. He had been everything to me, my friend, my lover, my protector. I remembered the first time we met, so innocently, so unaware of the storm we would create between us. He had been there when I had nothing, when the world felt like it was crashing down on me. He had shown me what it meant to trust, to love, to hope. But now he was gone, taken in an instant by something I could never understand. I could still hear the sound of his voice, the way it had rumbled in his chest when he laughed, the way it had softened when he whispered my name. I remembered the way his eyes had sparkled when he was happy, the way they had darkened when he was hurting. He had been so real, so full of life. I could still feel the warmth of his embrace, the way he had held me when everything else seemed to be falling apart. But that warmth was gone now, replaced by the coldness of the world that had swallowed him whole. And I was left standing in the aftermath alone. I reached the familiar street, the one that led to my home, and I stopped. The house loomed before me, dark and silent, like a looming shadow. The front door was shut tight, the windows dark, as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Inside, the remnants of a life I once knew sat in the corners. Unspoken words, forgotten laughter, memories that could never be reclaimed. I didn't know how to go inside. The thought of it made my chest tighten, made my breath catch in my throat. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in my mind, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The thought of facing the people I had once called family, people who had once accepted me without question, was terrifying. How had things gone so wrong? How had we gotten here? But there was no turning back now. I couldn't avoid them forever. With a deep breath, I pushed open the gate and made my way up the stone path to the front door. Every step felt like an eternity. I stood at the door for a long moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the silence echoing in my ears. The world around me was spinning, but here it was still. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my chest as I finally turned the knob and stepped inside. The house smelled the same, wood polish, stale air, and faint traces of the perfume my mother used to wear. But it felt different. The walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating in their familiarity. The memories clung to the air like dust, impossible to shake. I could hear my father's voice in the kitchen, low and steady, like it always had been. But there was a harshness in it now, a coldness that hadn't been there before. "Where have you been?" His voice broke through the silence, and I flinched at the venom in it. I hadn't expected anything else, but the sting of his words still caught me off guard. I turned to face him, my father standing at the doorway to the kitchen. His face was tired, worn from the years, but there was something harder in his gaze, something that made my stomach turn. His arms were crossed over his chest, his stance defensive. "I went for a walk," I said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "A walk," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You disappear for hours, and you come back with nothing to say for yourself except that you went for a walk?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing I said could undo what had been done. Nothing could change the fact that everything had fallen apart. Instead, I just stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I could feel the walls closing in again, the same suffocating pressure that had driven me out earlier. I was stuck in this house, stuck in this moment, and I couldn't breathe. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words barely audible. My father didn't respond. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. The silence between us stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, utterly alone. The echoes of the past were loud in my ears now, drowning out everything else. There was no way forward, no clear path out of this maze of hurt and regret. All I had were the memories of what had once been, and the painful truth that I could never go back. The air in the house was heavy with unspoken words. My father still stood there, his gaze fixed on me, but his eyes were distant, as if he were looking through me rather than at me. The silence was suffocating, thick and oppressive, and I could feel my chest tighten with every passing second. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words eluded me. Everything I thought of felt inadequate, too small for the enormity of the space that had opened between us. I stepped further into the house, but the feeling of being trapped only deepened. The house, once so familiar, now felt foreign, like a place I no longer belonged. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, the smell of old wood. It all seemed to mock me, a reminder of how much had changed without me even realizing it. My father didn't move. He didn't speak again, and neither did I. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, making my heart race. I could hear my own breath, shallow and quick, as if I were trying to steady myself in the face of something I couldn't control. I didn't know what else to do, I finally said, my voice breaking the silence. It sounded weak even to my own ears, but I had to say something. I had to make him understand, even though I knew he might never truly get it. My father's expression flickered for a moment, something between confusion and anger, and then he sighed, shaking his head. "You always think running away will solve everything," he muttered, his voice tired, the frustration evident. "You've been doing it your whole life, hiding from problems instead of facing them." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. It was true in a way. I had always run. I had run from pain, from people, from myself. It was easier that way, at least for a while. But now, in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened, I realized how much I had lost by never staying still long enough to face what was right in front of me. "I didn't know what else to do," I repeated, more to myself than to him. "You're just like your mother," he said bitterly. The words hit me like a slap, sharp and unexpected. His voice had taken on a cold edge, as though he had been holding it in for far too long. Always running away. Always hiding from the truth. And look where it got us. Look where it got you. I flinched at his words. The mention of my mother, her absence, felt like a raw wound being reopened. It wasn't just about her leaving, though that was part of it. It was the idea that somehow I had inherited her tendency to escape, to flee when things got too hard. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm not her," I said, my voice quieter now but firm. "I'm not running anymore. But I don't know how to fix this, Dad. I don't know how to make it right." For a moment my father didn't say anything. His shoulders slumped slightly, as though the fight had drained out of him. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw something like vulnerability in his eyes. "You don't have to fix it all at once," he said, his voice softer. "But you have to stop running. You have to face it, even if it's hard. We can't keep pretending like everything's okay when it's not." I didn't know how to respond to that. I had spent so long running, so long pretending that I could outrun my past, my mistakes, my pain. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to face it. To stop hiding. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure I was ready. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, small, fragile, but there. Maybe the first step toward healing wasn't about fixing everything, but simply about showing up, even when the past felt too heavy to bear. "I'll try," I said quietly. My father nodded, his face softening. It wasn't an apology and it wasn't a solution, but in that moment it felt like a small step forward. And for the first time in a long time I didn't feel so alone. The days that followed weren't easy. There were moments of silence, moments of anger, and moments when I questioned whether anything would ever truly change. But slowly things began to shift. My father and I started talking more, really talking about the things we'd avoided for so long. The years of distance, the hurt, the miscommunication. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was something. And sometimes something was enough. I returned to the house more often, not just to visit, but to rebuild. I began facing the things I had buried deep inside. Memories, regrets, the parts of me I had tried so hard to outrun. It wasn't easy, but with each small step, the weight lifted ever so slightly. The house that had once felt suffocating began to feel more like home again. And maybe the most important thing was that I stopped running, not just from my father, but from myself. I wasn't the same person I had been when I left. and I wasn't sure where the road ahead would take me. But for the first time in a long time, I was no longer afraid of finding out. It wasn't the end of my journey, not by a long shot, but it was a beginning of healing, of understanding, and of learning how to stand still long enough to face the things that scared me most. And in that, I found the courage to keep moving forward one step at a time.